1977, they added 3 protocols to dictate the circumstances of civilians in warfare, and 2 of those protocols in particular address civil war and similar circumstances, and they make provision for identifiable ethnic groups, such as you would have had in the breakup of Yugoslavia: Serbs, Croats, Slovenes, Montenegrins, Kosovars, Bosniaks, to prepare for civil war, just to keep it simple. So 20 odd years ago, our leader and founder, Mr. Gustav Müller, thought that it would be a good idea to do that in a very legal, decent, respectable way, put together a plan for the eventuality of the failure of South Africa, catastrophic failure, which he believed was likely, and which was forecast a long, long time ago by somebody who said that, there will be a black president one day, and everybody thought that this guy making the forecast had lost his marbles. And he went on to say that eventually there would be a catastrophic failure of the society, and a ferocious war would break out. So to answer your question in brief, white South African male, got a few children. I work for Suidlanders full-time, and I'm a paid employee. And to give that some context, especially in light of your previous question about where I am, I do foreign work for Suidlanders. So I get invited to all sorts of places, and I spread the good news of Suidlanders and try to tell the truth about what's happening in South Africa: farm murders, crime rates, expropriation of land without compensation, and so on and so forth. That's my little package, Jeremy.
Okay, so just for clarity, the word Suidlanders is an Afrikaans word. It translates directly to Southlanders, but that doesn't really work in English.
No, it doesn't work in English. A more poetic translation would be Southerners. But it comes from a biblical verse in which the Lord says, in the end times, my people in the south will bring an offering to me. So that was the source of inspiration for the name of the organization, which I just emphasize is purely and simply a civil defense organization constituted under the specific provisions of international law, to which South Africa subscribed twice over. A lawyer, a friend of mine, looked into it for me, and she came back with her little report, and she said, well, South Africa is a signatory to the protocols additional to the Geneva Conventions, and very unusually, they were adopted into the corpus of South African law too. She said it's an extraordinary thing. It doesn't happen very often, but the African National Congress, in its wisdom, and I say that without facetiousness, when they took power 35 years ago, 27th of April past, they, did many dramatic and drastic things. And one of them was to say, hey, this Geneva Conventions and their protocols additional, not only do we want to sign up, we want to incorporate them into our legal corpus. So, yeah, we're constituted under that as a civil defense organization. It's basically, butter and beans and blankets that we prepare in the eventuality of a massive conflict in our country.
Just for clarity, you said 35 years ago. I think we're going to get fact checked on that.
31 years
ago. Okay, so in even simpler terms, it's a network of white South Africans who are building an exit strategy in case.
Yeah, and I can't embroider on that, Jeremy. That's precisely what it is.
Now, when you say a network of white South Africans, obviously people are going to think, oh, that sounds quite racist.
Mm. Yeah, racist, and they're dishonest. because it applies equally to Pygmies, to Bosniaks, to those Hmong people that straddle the border between Vietnam and Cambodia, to the persecuted, if they are. I've heard stories to say that it's an absolute nonsense. But those Muslim Uyghurs in the west of China, it applies equally to all of the peoples of the world under the criterion, as I've already mentioned to you, of identifiable ethnic groups. And in Africa, whites are about as identifiable gets. It's just a very simple thing. If there was a crisis in this country and it became race-based, I say this country, I mean Russia, but if there was a crisis in South Africa and it became race-based and there was a threat to our people, what better than to remove yourself as a party from the conflict and go to a desolate, as our plan entails. And I apologize to everybody for the awful lighting. I'm in a cheap Soviet hotel room at the Arctic Circle. There's nothing wrong with it. It's spotlessly clean. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. But it's a cheap Soviet hotel room at the Arctic Circle. The sun set last night at 20 past 10. It came up this morning at about 2:15. And there are these thin curtains. So we've got the sunlight blazing in through the window and these cheap, thin curtains. And there's nowhere else for me to conduct this interview. So close your eyes and you won't get archives. What better than to say, you know what, if there's going to be a conflict, I don't want to be a hero. I'm going to get my family. I'm going to go to a safe area. I'm going to be a timid, meek little thing who doesn't want to fight, wish to regroup with like-minded people and establish a critical mass of human beings to be self-sustaining and to create a defensible perimeter. It's the most actively racist thing possible. It's completely passive, and it applies equally to every identifiable ethnic group in the world. That's United Nations law. If you think that's racist, write them a letter.
But why white South Africans?
Jeremy, the nature of our society is such that if there is a catastrophic civil crisis, a violent civil crisis, it is going to rupture or fracture along racial lines. It's always like that. It was like that in Yugoslavia. It was like, World War II, World War I, it's the way that it goes. Ultimately, you revert to your religion, your people, your place, your language. It's like being here among the Russians. The Slavic identity is much stronger than I thought it would be. And the brazen acknowledgement of ethnicity here in Russia is also much stronger than I thought it would be. There's no Soviet-style, altruistic, we're all one kind of thing. The Tajiks speak their language, and they gather together. You're around the guy because they will descend on. I say descend on, it makes it sound negative, but it's not meant to be. A certain cafeteria on a street corner, and they'll meet there on a Friday afternoon, and it won't be 1, 2, 3, 4 guys. It'll be 12 speaking their language right after midday Islamic prayers. It's not unnatural for ethnic groups to find succor and solace in their fellows, or for ethnicities to find succor and solace among theirs. There's nothing abnormal about it. If you become intrusive, That's another thing. If you say, well, the whole city has to observe Friday prayers, or all Muslims may not live in a certain area, that's an entirely different thing. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, under the provisions of international law, our boss, our leader, our founder saying, well, if the law exists, and if it looks to me as if South Africa is the shakiest proposition of all shaky propositions, and it's going to end badly, what could be wrong with me putting together a national emergency plan that is completely peaceful? We've never even had, up until now, an allegation of illegality, much less a conviction. We do everything by the book. We do it decently and respectably and quietly, and we don't tread on other people's toes. So yeah, people can say whatever asinine things they want to say, but it's dishonest by their standards, not mine, because the people who tend to say those things are the same people who believe that the United Nations is a force for good, by and large. So these are international laws within the umbrella of the United Nations. It's a Geneva Convention. Which way do you want it? Your laws are good or your laws are bad? Come on.
I remember you and I had lunch with a certain black politician. I won't mention his name because it doesn't really matter. And I don't know if he was joking or not, but he asked if he could join, and your answer was no. The reality, however, is that it's not about hatred towards others.
No, it's about the law. The law says identifiable ethnic groups. That man, is as black as the ace of spades. Clearly, we don't share an ethnic group. He's married to a white girl, and more power to him. And he told you and me a very interesting story about another black politician going by the initials JM, who refused to allow our acquaintance's wife.
Everybody knows who he is, Julius Malema.
Into his house. We were sitting over lunch, and he was telling the story of how Julius called him to pop in to discuss something. I hear you're in the area. We've got to have a vote on whatever tomorrow in the parliament. Please pop past. You and I are rivals, but let's endeavor to collaborate on this particular bill or whatever it was. So our acquaintance with his white wife went to Julius Malema's house, presumably his parliamentary residence around Cape Town. And Julius said to him, listen, you're not bringing that white thing in here. You can just forget about it right now. And so our acquaintance's wife was forced to sit in the motor car for 2 hours while he and Julius thrashed out this knotty dilemma or whatever it was that they were dealing with. Yeah, I mean, it's all nonsense. I said to our acquaintance, your friend, I scarcely know him, I've only met him once. It is simply the rules of the game. I could sit here, look you straight in your eyes and tell you all manner of lies, but I'm not going to. Don't worry, for you we'll make an exception. And I'm sure that when they wrote the law, they didn't really mean this. They meant more like that, and turn it all upside down and inside out and perform all sorts of intellectual gymnastics, warped logic and syllogism. But no, Jeremy, it's not my style. There is an international law. We subscribe to it. It's simple. Sorry.
South Africa is an interesting example to the rest of the world. We are obviously a failed multi-ethnic, multicultural project. There is no such thing as a rainbow nation. Mm-hmm. And everybody who thinks that it is a wonderful thing is very delusional.
Yeah. Jeremy, I just want to apologize for fiddling with the items on the desk in front of me here. I bought a stack of coffees and water because with the continual light coming in the window and only 4 hours of very, very semi-darkness, it's extremely difficult to sleep. And I had to take sleeping tablets just to get enough rest for the day. ahead of me. And so I'm, the story, a little bit groggy and croaky, and they make you thirsty too. Jeremy, thanks. Jeremy, it was always a fiction. There has to have been a better way to pursue the new South Africa Rainbow Nation dream. I don't have all the answers. I have some ideas, but what's more clear than the solution is the problem. I think if good minds had rubbed hard against one another with the right intentions, they might have come up with good solutions. For now, let it suffice to say that the problem is conspicuous. Reconciling or bridging the gulf between the broad masses and the white elite was always going to be a well-nigh impossible task. The suggestion that black people can't do it is poppycock. It's nonsense. You and I both know black people who are more competent than we are. But on average, you have a population of about 40 million people, of whom many are living in the Iron Age. They have Iron Age cultural values, Iron Age language, Iron Age abstract concepts, and so on and so forth. To hand a country as developed as South Africa was, world's first heart transplant, etc., etc., the list is long, to a populace that is by and large a long way removed from postmodernist European social, not constructs, but social norms, let's say, the norms that inform, the norms of education, the norms of intellect, the norms of ethics, etiquette, modi vivendi. To reconcile that is impossible. And so it was that we had a president a few years ago who notoriously had 5 wives. A previous wife had committed suicide, blaming him, incidentally. So he was 6 times married, and he was, at the time, I don't know whether it fell through or whether it's been concluded, he was at the time in his late 70s, betrothed to one of the princesses of the King of Swaziland. And he couldn't, I'm not necessarily against polygamy, but this guy who's practicing this very, very old way couldn't read numbers. And I think that there was a fallacious understanding among black people at the time of why white people and white media, etc., were so mocking of President Jacob Zuma, so sneering, so scoffing. It's not that he's black. It's not that he's primitive. It's that you've put a illiterate in charge of what was a late 20th century country with among the finest banking institutions in the world, etc., etc., etc. You've put a guy who can't count properly, as was evidenced in the parliament on a number of occasions, in charge. So, that's my sort of long-winded response to what you invited with your statement about, there isn't really a rainbow nation. No, there isn't really a rainbow nation, because to create that out of such disparate entities is impossible. I can't think of an example in history that it has been done. And I'm not the world's greatest historian, but I spend probably 30 hours a week studying history. I've never heard of anything similar in Roman times, Greek times, Persian times, Babylonian times, unless interpreted with the benefit of the doubt. Unless you say, well, in Chaldea, in the year whatever, there are historical records saying that the Uzbekis passing through on their Bactrian camels were really, really nice people. So we must construe that as a matter, as an expression of racial harmony. Unless you do perform some kind of, not even mental, but moral gymnastics of judgment, gymnastics of estimation and appreciation. There's just, you can't do that. You can't do what they tried to do in 1994 in South Africa and expect it to all go swimmingly well.
Which inadvertently means that homogenous societies tend to do better overall.
Yeah, well, we know the evidence for that. People shriek with fury when you bring it up, but the evidence is legion. Homogenous societies do best. And, it's terrible to say it, but the Russians are facing a tidal wave of immigration from the Central Asian republics and from the Kavkaz. The Kavkaz people don't worry them too much. The Dagi people and the Chechens from the Caucasus. But the Central Asians, the Tajiks, Uzbeks, Kyrgyz, Kazakhs, who did I leave out? The Tajiks or the Kyrgyz, I left one of them out. Those 5 Central Asian republics are very, 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 very different in their behavior and in their norms to the Slavic Russians. And they're streaming into Moscow. For those viewers who don't know, last year, February, the World Bank released a report, as they report on all sorts of things from time to time, on the Russian economy. And they said that the Russian economy is now the world's 4th largest. That was as of February last year. And I forget the exact number, but it was just about $6 trillion. Not less, 6.1, 6.2, 6.3, I forget the exact number. But they said, we can estimate from what we can observe. We can estimate what it is that we can't observe, but we can only report on what we can observe. So imagine if you see a machine and it's functioning, it's making chocolate bars or whatever, and the gears are turning and the conveyor belt is whirring along and there are all sorts of lights and lamps and things telling you how many chocolate bars are going out. If you're an engineer, you'd probably be able to say to somebody, look, I don't know all of the inner workings of that machine, but given the output, it's safe to say that there's probably 3 processors and 4 controllers and 9 wheels and 6 bearings and 12 pulleys. And the World Bank said, our report covers just the $6 trillion. We shall not speculate on the rest, but we believe it to be another 40 to 60%. 6 sixes are 36. So the high-end estimate would be that the economy is $9.6 trillion strong. The population is about 150 million people. Not that it's neither here nor there. I've just mentioned it as a fact for people's reference. And it's running hot. It's running extremely hot. The prosperity here is something that has to be seen to be believed, Jeremy. With the result that these Tajiks, Uzbeks, Kyrgyz, Kazakhs, and Turkmen is the one that I didn't mention, are streaming in here by the hundreds upon hundreds of thousands. And it's driving the Slavic Russians and the Aryan Russians and related groups crazy because the value systems are so enormously different. And those people come in here and they don't, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. It's a case of when in Russia, do just as we did in Tashkent or Samarkand They project onto the society more primitive, for want of a better word, norms.
Same as Europe.
Exactly the same as Europe. And it never makes it better. Nobody ever said, golly gee, thank goodness we've got those whatever in our society now. Now we'll be able to make music. Goodness me. Now Nobel Prizes will be worth something. Oh, now we'll be off to the stars when it, as far as physics is concerned. Generally, the most homogenous societies are the most successful societies. And sadly, for the early 21st century, we're experimenting in the other direction in not only, but certainly to a huge degree, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the USA, and Western Europe. And the results are not looking good. But the fraternalists who hold the reins in their hands, the brotherhoods of paedophiliac, satanic suicide death cults, cabals, who control our societies on behalf of the elites, are so sworn to this suiciding of Amalek at this time that so you have people like Keir Starmer dragging his own society to hell. Emmanuel Macron, this clown from Germany, I'd love to do an IQ test on him. Merz, Justin Trudeau, as what is his name? He's not, strictly speaking, he's not a professor. He's a docent from the University of Uppsala in Finland. Dr. Edward, not Dowd, that's the BlackRock fund manager. Edward Dutton has demonstrated very persuasively, and the videos can be found on YouTube. This is the spiteful mutants of our society, the genetic detritus that takes a shortcut to success through fraternal organizations and sells its soul in the process, and is hell-bent on destroying everything good around them. They hate themselves, they hate their mothers, and they hate their paternal ecosystem, the inheritance of their fathers, their countries, their societies, their value systems. And they're hell-bent on destroying them. It's as simple as that. It's not this case. I see it in the media all the time, Jeremy, and it's starting to really get to me. On the right wing, I mean to say. Golly gee, I don't understand why Keir Starmer would do something so stupid. You know, it's the mentality of the retarded. It's where the filter doesn't keep out people who are severely mentally compromised. And so you find them among us asking questions like that, you know, like watching a football match and saying, I don't know, whoever, Sir Alex Ferguson, I just can't understand. He's so stupid and I'm so clever, sitting on the couch here eating crisps and drinking beer. I can see the whole problem. I don't know why he can't see it. It's not that Keir Starmer is stupid. Keir Starmer has 165 IQ points on you. It's not that he's stupid, it's that he's a pervert. It's that he is devoted to the destruction of himself and his paternity. Likewise, Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson did a trivium or a quadrivium at Oxford University. Boris Johnson's got more brains than many average cities. He's not stupid. He's a pervert. It's not that these people don't know what they're doing. They know precisely what they're doing, but they've made blood oaths to paedophiliac, satanic, suicidal, death cult cabals that suit their genetic perversity, their genetic this thing that, as I say, Professor Edward Dutton describes as the genetic mutants within our societies.
If we look at the Suidlanders and what it represents in South Africa, as we said earlier, this network of white people preparing with an exit strategy just in case, it's sort of like a microcosm of something a lot bigger worldwide. Some people might know something called the Kalergi Plan, but there definitely appears to be an attempt to remove white people altogether, which makes the Suidlanders even more important. Let me give you a statistic I found earlier. 100 years ago, 1925, Simon, of the world's population, around 27 to 30% was white. And when we say white, we generally mean of European ancestry. I think it's fairly obvious what a white person is. Today, in 2025, of the world's population, it's around 10 to 12%.
Yeah, but Jeremy, that the success of Europeans was very much a self-originated thing. Nobody gave anybody a hand. There are exceptions, of course. There are exceptions. Everybody knows that one form of ink originated in China, and gunpowder originated in China. There are exceptions. Roof tiles in Korea. But by and large, it was a self-made success. Our dependence upon other peoples was very, very low. At a certain point, we attracted ethnic groups that hated us from faraway lands. And those ethnic groups came to form a very strong voice, almost a choir or an orchestra. And from the very beginning, we know this from the Frankfurt School, for instance, they began to criticize our norms and mores. It's as if I was a tick and I jumped on the back of a dog, started sucking its lifeblood out, all the while muttering and murmuring about the poor quality of the blood. So we had an enormous success in terms of birth and live births and reduction in infant mortality. We did have some blips along the way. I mean, the emergence of surgery in the 18th century had tremendously bad consequences for women in childbirth, for example. Hitherto, midwives ensured that childbirth was a relatively successful process for both mother and child. Along come surgeons, and they say, stand one side, I know everything. And you have the sudden emergence of puerperal sepsis. Puerperal sepsis was at one point, one in every 6 mothers died of puerperal sepsis. And apparently, it's one of the most painful ways to go. Suffering septicemia of the vulva or the vagina, the cervix is apparently beyond painful. And these women would die in absolute shrieking pain. So our societies and our modes were not flawless, but by and large, we were able to achieve that tremendous ascendancy. It's important to point out the exceptions, like I've just said with puerperal sepsis. So we get this tremendous ascendancy. And then along come these aliens and they say, oh, golly gee, you say love your neighbor, but it seems to me that you don't love your neighbor. Not nearly as much as I think you should love your neighbor. And so it was that during the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, etc., you can the dates are malleable. You had a circumstance in which aliens were telling white Western society, you are overbreeding, out of the left-hand sides of their mouths, and out of the right-hand sides of their mouths, they were saying, it's only because you don't hate black people, that you don't love black people, but your Bible says that you should love everybody equally, that you don't spend money on natal clinics in Africa. See beauty. Beauty is 8 years old. Beauty lives in Uganda. Beauty has a beautiful smile. But beauty is really very sad inside. If you would send $10, Beauty could eat for 1 whole year and there would be change left over. Poor Beauty. And so you had the West recriminating with itself, or aliens within the West, recriminating against the West for being successful, for being self-sustainable, for being able to sponsor itself, to the point that it was putting, if you believe the story, men on the moon, but certainly men in outer space anyway. This is conceptually an unbelievable thing. Our success was so great that we left Earth. This was the success of Western society. But we were told, you're bad because you don't allow Chinese students to study in your universities at your cost. You don't sponsor neonatal or OBGYN clinics in the Central African Republic, etc., etc., etc. We all know the narrative. So they told us to stop breeding, just as they convinced us to fund the breeding of Central America, South America, Africa, and Asia, broadly speaking. None of that medicine originated in the Amazon jungle. None of those procedures, none of those developments, none of that progress. But we were held emotional hostage over other people. You're so successful and you just don't care that your neighbor is suffering. Look at poor Beauty. This was I don't like to do these theatricals and I hate it when other people do it, but sometimes you have to spread the butter thick on the bread. You only have to, man, in your mind's eye, imagine, Jeremy, those images I'm from South Africa. We didn't have much of this, obviously, during apartheid, but we did get Reader's Digest. And there would sometimes be an insert in the Reader's Digest in the doctor's waiting room or the dentist's waiting room, a little piece of cardboard between the pages with a picture of a 15-year-old Chadian girl from Chad, saying, whatever her name might be, I'll use a Zulu name, Tandi. Tandi is 16. Tandi has 6 children. Tandi is hungry. Tandi's children are also hungry. And somehow they would weave into the wording, you're fat, Westerner. Not you and your patrimony, the work of your fathers, have succeeded in making things cushy. Nobody did nothing for you. But you're fat, and a woman who can't control her libidinous activities is hungry. And by the way, Jeremy, did you know, Jeremy? Oh, Jeremy. When mothers don't get enough nutrition, it affects the quality of their breast milk, I'm just saying. But you could change that if you weren't so selfish, Jeremy. Send your money to this address over here, and we'll make sure that Thandi and all of her friends can procreate abundantly at your cost, with no risk to them. So that's my theatrics for today, Jeremy, in reply to your observation.
Well, what you're saying, Simon, is that the West, aka white people, have been demoralized.
Yeah. We were told for so long that we were successful and nobody else was, and that's unfair, that we began to believe the conspicuously irrational. I mean, the syllogism within that short sentence. It's a perversion of reason. But they said it enough times that we began to believe it.
Now, with this demoralization and clear decrease in the white population globally, how does farm murder segue into that? And of course, by extension, Trump's discussion a week or two ago with the South African president.
Jeremy, I'm a pragmatist and a realist. I find Donald Trump extremely charming, but I don't believe a word that he says. And it's a source of endless dismay to me that conservatives fall for his stories. He's got this Doge thing going on, with which he's saving about £7.57, $8 or $9, while he's managed to get Joe Biden to sign off. And this is what happened: $100 billion increase in the military, from just under 800 billion to now 895 billion. And he's proposing a military budget of $1.4 trillion. So this is a man who says to you, please congratulate me for, I don't know what. Please congratulate me for sweeping the floor. I'm such an earnest little happy helper elf in the household. Meanwhile, he's dragged in 25 kilograms of mud in the laundry or something. I'm struggling to come up with a good little parable, but it's a bit like this Ukraine story at the moment. And it's just so false. This is not my war. This is Joe Biden's war. The donations to Ukraine made by the United States of America by the Trump administration between 2017 and 2020, inclusive those 4 years, were more than double the president that came after him and the president that came before him. This is exactly Donald Trump's war, and the Russians know it. And, when you speak to Russians here, they're not mentally retarded people. These are genuine readers, writers, and counters. As one guy said to me, it's not as it used to be, but there was a time when the plumbers were reading Don Quixote, which, as your viewers may or may not know, is arguably the greatest work of literature, of all literature, arguably. I think the Times of London had a thing once where it came number 1 out of 100. These people are not idiots. They know full well that the things that are being said in the West are absolute rubbish, but they're just to fool us. Everybody knows the Russian government doesn't believe a word, and the Russian people don't believe a word. It's only we who are this, the net effect of years of overly successful breeding, the mentally retarded people of the West, who fall for any of the stuff that's said. Is similarly with the the white emigres being offered asylum, the 49 people. It's a meaningless number. It's absolutely meaningless. It will make no difference to anything. It's purely and simply a PR stunt. As you say, there is a connection between this demographic crisis and what's happening in South Africa. One illustration of that is, or one example is, we know from the 2017 land audit that the number of white commercial farmers left in South Africa is about 25,000. We have about 33,000 commercial farmers, 8,000 of which are black, colored, Indian, and 25,000 white. And we know from year in and year out, you've seen all the little Excel spreadsheets that they put out, that the number of farmers, not their wives, children, just farmers, commercial farmers, murdered in farm attacks every year is somewhere between upper 30s and early 50s. Let's take 45 as an average. The United Nations measures intentional homicide in per 100,000. So if you multiply 25,000 by 4 to get 100,000, and you multiply 45 by 4 to get a percentage or a proportion of that 100,000, then the murder rate of white South African farmers is something like 180 per 100,000. You can be conservative and say 150 per 100,000. Compare that to an average murder rate in Europe. It's a false comparison because we're comparing a specific group with a broader population, but it gives some reference. The murder rate or the intentional homicide rate in Europe is under 3. The intentional homicide, as the United Nations puts it, rate in the USA is just about 5. It hovered around 4.1 for many years, but it's gone up a little bit. Call it 5 for the sake of a round number. The death rate, it's not homicide, it's just death, in what is supposedly the world's most dangerous occupation, namely logging, is 97.8. Now you tell me what is wrong with that. And you have a president going around the world telling people, no, there's no tax on white farmers. They know it's very, very, very bad, and it's very wrong. And it is symptomatic of what's happening in the broader Western world. People are being told, don't overbreed. Here's the abortion clinic if you need it. But please donate to poor little Beauty in Angola, because she doesn't have a natal clinic for miles around. And just look at her smile. Doesn't she have a beautiful smile? Similarly, we want your land in South Africa, but we refuse to acknowledge your true circumstances. You know, this perversion of reality. No, you're not being killed. But by the way, it would be handy if you would give up your land for free. You know, expropriation without compensation. There's this muddle up of ideas that could never have been successful in preceding generations. They've had to depend very, very heavily upon rapeseed oil and refined sugar and refined wheat and the clot shots and adulterated water and very, very poor breeding strategies among white people over the past 4 generations to manufacture a generation, that is to say us, stupid enough to believe those conspicuously inverted lies, Jeremy.
So the word genocide has been thrown around a lot. Now, I know that you take exception to it. Why?
Well, excuse me, Jeremy. I apologize again for the terrible light quality and for the drinking coffee on camera, but my voice is really on its last legs after a sleepless night, and then too many sleeping pills. Strictly speaking, people can look this up. They can verify it for themselves. But what's happening in South Africa would fall into the category or within the definition of genocide very, 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 very easily. It is a word that has been, under international law, has been permitted to become almost an umbrella term. But
which specific group falls into that category very, very easily?
I mean, the white people. So in other words, if you look it up, how the United Nations defines genocide, if I look at you sideways with malicious intent, it's practically genocide according to the United Nations. I'm exaggerating, but genocide means the wiping out of a people. It means the last of the Mohicans the day after he dies. In real English, that's what it means. It means that if I take the Armenian people and I kill all of them and there are none left with no exceptions, that is genocide. Like suicide, like fratricide, like matricide. It means when the object in question, in this case an ethnic group, is extirpated with no exceptions. However, the United Nations have broadened that category to take everybody's feelings into account, with the result that, technically speaking, what is happening to white people in South Africa can be described as a genocide, particularly the Boer farmers, as a class, because they are more of a class than a group. They are more an involuntary entity than a voluntary entity. However, I never use the word genocide because I don't like the fact that the United Nations plays fast and loose with the English language to suit itself. I don't think that what's happening in South Africa now, not I don't think, it's flipping, it's just mathematics, and you can look it up, shorter Oxford Dictionary. It's not genocide. Not every last white person is being killed or has already been killed. I'm still alive. All three of my sons are.
Me too.
Yeah. Now that you mention it, Jeremy. So it's not a genocide, and it's a great pity that they do play so fast and loose with language. But is there an orchestrated campaign against white South African farmers? Unquestionably. On the 23rd of January, the Minister of Agriculture sent through a bill that became an act called the Development and the Preservation, or the Development and the Protection of Agricultural Land, which basically turns all agricultural land in South Africa into ultimately the steward of the Department of Agriculture. They may call the shots if it so behooves them on what crops may be planted, what, etc., etc., etc. So it's a draconian thing. On the 24th of January the following year, the Expropriation Without Compensation Bill was passed to make it an act of law. Then we discovered that there will be in October a bill passed, which I forget the correct name, but it's equal redistribution of property for equality purposes. In other words, whereby the government is entitled to dictate that property be expropriated for nil compensation and given to another party to dictate and determine and ensure some kind of economic parity. This is not disputed. It's not disputable whether there is or isn't a campaign against large-scale property owners in South Africa, namely the Afrikaner boer folk farmers. It's indisputable. And just to those people who watch this and say, yeah, but they've got so much farm, got so many farms. It's a fallacy. It's a fiction. Even during apartheid, outside of the black townships in this province from which I come, which was then called Natal, which means birth, like neonatal clinic, because it was named on Christmas Day by the Portuguese 500 years ago. The Zulu people, even during apartheid, outside of their townships, whatever property they may have owned individually, owned 32% of the province. This notion that since wherever black people, 90% of the population had 10% of the land and so on and so forth, is an absolute fiction. Absolument. That's one example. Since then, so it's always been 32%. During the darkest, most evil days of white racist supremacy, South African apartheid, 32% of the land, just in the form of that trust, in that province alone, besides any other farms or township housing or whatever, the huge townships of South Africa, the enormous from horizon to horizon townships of South Africa. So the property held by blacks, even at those dark days, the land property was, I don't know, some people say as high as 60% in that province. Since then, we had a 19-year process of redistributing land based upon land claims. So where Jeremy, as a black man, would go to, following very heavy advertising, endless promotions on black television channels, radio stations, and newspapers, would go along to the local office, or not go along to the local office, because they even had mobile kiosks, mobile, trucks and trains driving around the country to every last remote rural community for 19 years, saying, if Simon's father, great-grandfather, knocked your great-grandfather over the head and stole his land, and you wish to claim it back, fill in this form, we'll assist you. And so it was that many hundreds of thousands of hectares of land were given to their owners. Then the process was terminated because it had come to its conclusion. It was exhausted. All of the land claims were addressed. All of the land claims were addressed. Every outstanding, unfairly taken, owed, indebted piece of land was compensated, if that's the correct word. The land was given back, or they could choose the money in lieu, the community. Done. End of story. Done, 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 done. And now the government is saying, well, golly gee, life is unfair to black people. We are going to have to expropriate land without compensation, and the basis will be, I forget the name of the act that I gave to you 2 minutes ago, Jeremy, which they say will be passed in October. I don't know, I've been ranting for a little while now, and I've kind of lost my train of thought, partly because it's just such a frustrating topic, and partly because I'm running on 3.5 hours sleep or whatever in the land of the midnight sun over here, Jeremy.
What is the moral of the story?
The moral of the story is that since the beginning of time, the only way that, in fleshly terms, that just causes can prevail in the face of unjust men is by creating critical mass. In the face of the onslaught upon Caucasian Christianity, as the pedophiliac, satanic, suicide, death cult cabal expresses it, the only way that we're going to survive is if we stick together to create critical masses, to have organizations like Suidlanders, Or not like Suidlanders. If you want a different style of thing, you don't want a national emergency plan, you don't think there's going to be a catastrophic civil crisis in your society, then fine. But there's nothing else to be done. Keyboard warrioring is not going to help you. Preparing alone is, at the end of the day, not going to help you. You've got to get people to come together to defend their own interest. And I say that in synopsis, Jeremy, as you say, we're coming into land, so I won't wax too much about it.
Oh, okay. So that was the end of your sentence.
Yeah, sorry.
Simon, how then can I find out more about the Suidlanders?
Sorry about that, Jeremy. The inflection was going the wrong way. Suidlanders.org, SUID, landers.org. And I'd like to make a heartfelt plea to anybody who has who wishes to support us. I'm in Arkhangelsk in Russia at the moment, carrying this word to the ends of the earth. We work very hard and we box well above our weight to carry a standard for conservative Caucasian Christianity in the world. And it doesn't happen by magic. If you wish to donate, please, please, please donate. When you go to that site, SUID, landers.org, Suidlanders.org, when you log in there, go to the first page, scroll to the bottom, you can make donations so that we can continue to do our work.
Yeah, you take international currency.
Yes, we do, yeah.
On that note, Simon Roche, thank you for joining me in the trenches.